Chapter 1: The Invisible Framework That Decides Who Becomes Wealthy. What if wealth is not created by money, intelligence, or opportunity, but by a way of thinking so subtle that most people never realize it exists? What if long before the first dollar is earned, a mental framework quietly determines who will build a fortune and who will spend their life chasing one? Every self-made fortune begins long before the first visible success. It begins in the unseen architecture of the mind. Decisions, interpretations, assumptions, expectations. These invisible elements form a framework that shapes behavior over decades, not days. And this framework, once set, pulls life in a predictable direction. Most people believe wealth is the result of hard work. Others believe it's luck. Some think it's talent or connections. But those who build lasting fortunes understand something deeper. Effort is filtered through mindset. Opportunity is filtered through perception. And money flows toward those whose mental structure can hold it. Two people can face the same situation and walk away with radically different outcomes. One sees risk. The other sees leverage. One waits for certainty. The other acts with incomplete information. One spends to feel successful. The other delays gratification to build power. These differences do not come from intelligence. They come from framework. The mental framework behind every self-made fortune is not about positive thinking or motivation. It is about how reality is interpreted, how problems are framed, how time is valued, how responsibility is assigned, how setbacks are processed. These patterns repeat so consistently that outcomes become predictable. Wealthy individuals do not think, "How can I make money?" They think, "How does value move through systems?" They do not ask, "What do I want now?" They ask, "What compounds later?" They do not wait for permission. They do not seek consensus. They do not rely on mood. They rely on structure. This is why many intelligent, hardworking people remain stuck. Their effort is real, but their framework is misaligned. They react instead of design. They consume instead of build. They chase outcomes instead of mastering inputs. Over time, this creates exhaustion without leverage. The self-made thinker approaches life differently. They assume responsibility by default. If something fails, they ask what variable they misjudged. If something works, they study why. They see feedback where others see failure. They see systems where others see chaos. Money responds to this way of thinking because money itself is a system. It flows toward efficiency, clarity, and long-term logic. It avoids emotional decision-making. It avoids short-term thinking. It avoids fragility. This is why sudden wealth often disappears. Without the framework, money has nowhere stable to stay. It leaks through impulse, fear, ego, and poor judgment. But when the framework exists first, wealth grows into it naturally. The mental framework behind fortune is quiet. It does not announce itself. It shows up in daily decisions no one applauds. It shows up in patience when others rush. In restraint when others indulge. In consistency when others seek novelty. It also shows up in how time is perceived. The self-made thinker treats time as an asset, not something to kill. They protect focus. They invest attention deliberately. They understand that what you repeatedly think about becomes what you repeatedly act on. This framework is not inherited. It is built. Often slowly. Often painfully. Often through mistakes that rewire perception. But once formed, it becomes a lens through which every decision passes. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Most people never examine their framework. They inherit it unconsciously, from family, culture, fear, and survival thinking. Then they spend their lives executing someone else's mental blueprint while wondering why results never change. But the moment you become aware of the framework, you gain leverage. Awareness creates choice. Choice creates redesign. Redesign changes trajectory. This audiobook is not about tactics. Tactics change. This is about the internal structure that makes tactics work. The mental scaffolding that supports wealth long before money appears. The way of thinking that quietly separates builders from consumers, owners from earners, and creators from participants. Because once you understand the framework, you stop asking why success feels out of reach, and start seeing exactly where the leverage has been hiding. And that raises the next question, one most people avoid entirely. How does the mind of a self-made individual actually relate to risk, control, and responsibility when everything is uncertain? Because the next chapter reveals the first core pillar of this framework, and why most people unknowingly reject it the moment pressure appears. Chapter 2. Why responsibility creates power, and avoidance destroys it. What if the single difference between those who build fortunes and those who endlessly struggle is not intelligence, effort, or luck, but the way responsibility is handled when life becomes uncomfortable? What if power does not come from control over circumstances, but from something far more internal and far less discussed? Every self-made fortune is built on an extreme relationship with responsibility. Not the surface-level kind where someone says, "I take responsibility," but the deeper kind where responsibility is assumed even when it feels unfair, inconvenient, or undeserved. This is where the mental framework begins to separate. Most people subconsciously avoid responsibility. Not overtly, but psychologically. When something goes wrong, they search for explanations that protect their self-image. The economy, the timing, the system, other people, bad luck. These explanations feel comforting, but they quietly remove power. Because responsibility and power are linked. The moment responsibility is outsourced, power follows it out the door. The self-made thinker understands this instinctively. They do not waste energy arguing whether something was fair. They ask a different question entirely. Given that this happened, what can I control next? This subtle shift changes everything. It transforms obstacles into leverage points. It turns setbacks into data. It turns frustration into focus. This is not about blame. It is about ownership. Blame looks backward. Ownership looks forward. When responsibility is fully accepted, the mind stops waiting. It stops hoping for rescue. It stops negotiating with reality. Action becomes cleaner. Decisions become faster. And most importantly, learning accelerates. This is why two people can experience the same failure and diverge permanently. One internalizes it as evidence of limitation. The other internalizes it as information. One becomes cautious. The other becomes calibrated. The self-made framework treats every outcome as feedback. Success is studied, not celebrated excessively. Failure is analyzed, not personalized. Emotional attachment to outcomes is replaced with intellectual curiosity. This creates an unfair advantage. Because while others are busy protecting their ego, the self-made thinker is busy improving their model of reality. Responsibility also changes how effort is applied. Most people work hard in bursts, driven by urgency or fear. The self-made individual works deliberately, guided by cause and effect. They are not busy. They are precise. They understand that effort without ownership leads to exhaustion, while ownership without panic leads to leverage. There is a reason responsibility feels heavy. It removes excuses. It removes comforting narratives. It removes the illusion that someone else will fix things. But in removing these, it reveals something far more valuable: agency. Agency is the true currency of wealth creation. When you believe your actions meaningfully shape outcomes, you act differently. You prepare more. You observe more closely. You recover faster. You adapt instead of repeating mistakes. Over time, this compounds into competence, and competence attracts opportunity. This is why responsibility is often avoided. It demands maturity. It demands delayed gratification. It demands honesty about gaps in skill, judgment, or discipline. And honesty is uncomfortable. But discomfort is not danger. It is data. The self-made framework teaches the mind to stay present with discomfort long enough to extract value from it. Instead of numbing, escaping, or rationalizing, the self-made thinker asks, "What is this moment trying to teach me about leverage?" Because every challenge contains leverage, but only for those willing to claim ownership of the situation. Responsibility also shapes how time is used. People who avoid responsibility drift. They react. They procrastinate. They wait for clarity that never comes. Those who embrace responsibility design. They plan imperfectly. They act with incomplete information. They adjust in motion. This is why they appear decisive while others appear cautious. In reality, they are simply willing to carry responsibility sooner. And here is the paradox most people never realize. Responsibility feels like pressure at first, but it becomes freedom over time. The more responsibility you can carry, the fewer things can destabilize you. The fewer excuses you need. The less dependent you become on external validation or permission. Eventually, responsibility stops feeling like a burden and starts feeling like control. This is the quiet foundation beneath every self-made fortune. Not confidence, not bravado, but a willingness to say again and again, "This is mine to solve." And once this framework locks in, a dangerous question emerges. Dangerous because it forces a confrontation with fear itself. If responsibility creates power, then what role does fear play in decision-making? Why do some people act despite uncertainty while others freeze, even when they understand exactly what to do? Because the next chapter exposes how the self-made mind interprets fear, and why most people unknowingly let it dictate their financial destiny long before money is ever involved. Chapter 3: How the self-made mind uses fear instead of obeying it. What if fear is not the enemy of wealth, but the raw material from which every self-made fortune is shaped? What if the difference between those who build extraordinary lives and those who remain stuck is not the absence of fear, but the way fear is interpreted, processed, and used? Most people believe successful individuals are fearless. That belief is comforting because it explains inaction. If they are brave and you are not, then hesitation feels justified. But the truth is more unsettling. The self-made thinker feels fear just as intensely, sometimes more intensely, than everyone else. The difference is that fear does not hold authority over their decisions. Fear is information, not instruction. The average mind treats fear as a stop sign, a signal to retreat, delay, or wait for certainty. The self-made mind treats fear as a data point, a signal that something meaningful is at stake, that growth is nearby, that leverage may exist just beyond discomfort. This single distinction changes everything. Fear arises whenever the mind encounters uncertainty. And uncertainty is unavoidable when building anything new: wealth, skill, influence, or independence. The problem is not fear itself, but the meaning assigned to it. Most people interpret fear as danger. The self-made individual interprets fear as unfamiliarity. Unfamiliarity can be learned. Danger must be avoided. This reframing allows action where others freeze. The self-made thinker does not ask, "What if this goes wrong?" They ask, "What is the downside and can I survive it?" This question grounds fear in reality instead of imagination. Most fear lives in vague futures that never arrive. When examined closely, it often collapses under logic. And when fear does not collapse, when risk is real, the self-made thinker still does not panic. They reduce risk through preparation, skill, and structure. Fear becomes something to manage, not something to obey. This is why many talented people never build wealth. Talent reduces early friction, which delays exposure to fear. When fear finally appears, when the stakes rise, they lack the mental conditioning to move through it. They retreat to what feels safe even if safe is limiting. The self-made framework trains the mind differently. It expects fear. It plans for it. It treats fear as part of the cost of meaningful progress. Just as muscle grows through resistance, confidence grows through survived fear. Every time fear is faced and survived, the mind recalibrates. What once felt threatening becomes neutral. What once caused hesitation becomes routine. This is how courage is built, not through affirmation but through repetition. Fear also sharpens focus. When properly used, it forces clarity. It demands preparation. It highlights weak assumptions and fragile plans. The self-made thinker does not numb fear. They listen to it carefully, extracting insight while refusing to surrender control. This is why they appear calm under pressure. Not because pressure is absent, but because pressure has been normalized. The average person waits to feel ready. The self-made individual understands that readiness is a byproduct of action, not a prerequisite. If you wait for fear to disappear, you will wait forever. But if you act while afraid, fear gradually loses its grip. This is especially true in financial decisions. Investing, building, negotiating, and leading all trigger fear because outcomes are uncertain and stakes are real. The self-made thinker does not avoid these arenas. They enter them deliberately, knowing that fear signals relevance. They also understand something critical. Fear is amplified by isolation. When fear is unexamined, it grows. When articulated, it shrinks. This is why the self-made individual thinks in frameworks, writes, reflects, and models scenarios mentally. Structure reduces emotional noise. Fear thrives in chaos. It weakens in clarity. Another distinction is time horizon. Fear is short-term focused. It asks, what if this hurts now? The self-made framework expands the timeline. It asks, what does avoidance cost me in 5 years? Often, the cost of not acting far outweighs the risk of acting. This long-term lens makes fear negotiable. And here is the part most people resist. Fear never disappears completely. Even at the highest levels of success, it returns. New arenas, higher stakes, greater responsibility. But by then the framework is strong. Fear becomes familiar terrain. Those who build fortunes are not fearless. They are fear-literate. They know when fear signals recklessness, and when it signals opportunity. They know the difference between danger and growth. And most importantly, they know that letting fear decide is the most expensive decision of all. Because fear always demands payment. Either up front through discomfort or over time through regret. And once fear stops being the decision maker, another powerful shift occurs. One that most people never see coming. The relationship with time itself changes. Patience replaces urgency. Strategy replaces impulse. And that leads to the next pillar of the mental framework behind every self-made fortune. Why the ability to delay gratification quietly separates those who build lasting wealth from those who experience brief success and long stagnation. Chapter 4. Why patience creates wealth while urgency destroys it. What if impatience is not just a personality trait, but a silent financial liability? What if the reason most people never build lasting wealth is not because they lack opportunity, but because they cannot tolerate the time required for compounding to work? Every self-made fortune is built on an unusual relationship with time. While most people feel pressured by time, rushed, anxious, constantly behind, the self-made thinker uses time as an ally. They do not fight it. They do not try to outpace it. They design around it. This difference begins with patience. Patience is often misunderstood as passivity or waiting. In reality, patience in the self-made framework is active, disciplined, and strategic. It is the ability to act consistently without demanding immediate validation. It is the ability to plant seeds without digging them up to check if they're growing. Most people struggle here. They want results quickly, not because they are lazy, but because uncertainty is uncomfortable. Immediate results provide emotional relief. They confirm that effort was worth it. But this need for quick feedback quietly sabotages long-term outcomes. Urgency narrows thinking. It compresses time horizons. It pushes people toward decisions that feel productive now but are expensive later. Impulsive spending. Premature scaling. Chasing trends. Abandoning plans before compounding has a chance to show itself. The self-made mind sees this pattern early and rejects it. They understand that wealth is not built through speed, but through sustained direction. That most meaningful gains arrive late, not early. That the most valuable phase of growth is often the least visible. This is why patience creates an unfair advantage. When others quit because progress feels slow, the patient individual continues. When others pivot constantly, the patient one refines. When others demand certainty, the patient one accepts calculated ambiguity. Over time, these small differences create massive divergence. Patience also changes how setbacks are interpreted. The impatient mind sees delay as failure. The patient mind sees delay as part of the process. This distinction prevents emotional overreaction and keeps systems intact long enough to mature. Consider how compounding actually works. Early gains are small and unimpressive. Growth feels flat. Then, seemingly suddenly, momentum accelerates. Most people exit just before this inflection point, not because the plan was wrong, but because the weight felt unbearable. The self-made thinker expects this. They plan for boredom. They plan for doubt. They plan for the long middle where effort continues without applause. This expectation is crucial. Without it, patience feels like stagnation. With it, patience feels like progress in disguise. Time also reveals quality. Bad ideas often produce quick results that fade. Strong ideas produce slow results that endure. The patient framework filters for durability, not excitement. This is especially important in money decisions. Impatient individuals chase high returns, fast wins, and shortcuts. Patient individuals build structures, skills, businesses, investments that grow steadily and predictably. One path creates volatility and stress. The other creates stability and leverage. Patience also sharpens judgment. When you are not rushed, you can think clearly. You can observe patterns. You can wait for better timing. You can say no to good opportunities to preserve capacity for great ones. This ability to wait is not hesitation. It is discipline. Urgency, on the other hand, creates noise. It pushes action before understanding. It prioritizes motion over direction. And over time, it erodes trust in systems, in strategies, and in oneself. The self-made framework treats urgency as a signal to slow down. When emotion spikes, they pause. When pressure increases, they return to principles. This restraint protects them from self-inflicted damage. Another quiet benefit of patience is reputation. Those who act calmly, consistently, and predictably become trusted. Trust attracts capital, partnerships, and opportunity. Impulsive actors may gain attention, but they lose credibility. Wealth flows toward reliability. Patience also reinforces identity. Every time you delay gratification in service of a longer-term goal, you reinforce the belief that you are someone who builds, not someone who consumes. Over time, this identity compounds just like capital. And here is the paradox. Patience does not slow progress, it accelerates it. Because it prevents costly reversals. Because it preserves energy. Because it keeps systems intact long enough for leverage to emerge. Most people overestimate what can be achieved in a year and underestimate what can be achieved in a decade. The self-made thinker flips this equation. They focus on trajectory, not speed. Direction, not dopamine. This is why their success often looks sudden from the outside. But it is never sudden. It is delayed visibility. And once patience becomes internalized, another transformation occurs. The relationship with effort itself changes. Work stops being about intensity and becomes about consistency. Burnout gives way to rhythm. Which leads directly to the next pillar of the mental framework behind every self-made fortune. Why consistency, not intensity, is the true engine of compounding, and why most people unknowingly sabotage it before it ever has a chance to work. Chapter 5. Why consistency builds fortunes while intensity burns them. What if the reason most people never achieve lasting success is not because they don't work hard, but because they work hard in the wrong way? What if intensity, the very thing society praises, is often the reason progress collapses before it compounds? Every self-made fortune is built on consistency, not intensity. This is one of the most misunderstood truths in wealth creation. Intensity looks impressive, feels productive. It creates stories. Consistency, by contrast, looks boring, quiet, repetitive. And because of that, it is often ignored, until it's too late. The average person approaches effort emotionally. When motivation is high, they push hard. When energy drops or results lag, they pull back. This creates a cycle of bursts and burnout. Progress spikes briefly, then resets. Over years, this pattern produces exhaustion without leverage. The self-made thinker rejects this cycle early. They understand that intensity is unsustainable, but consistency is scalable. Intensity depends on mood. Consistency depends on structure. One fluctuates, the other compounds. Consistency is not about doing more. It's about doing enough, repeatedly, without interruption. It's about building a rhythm that can survive boredom, doubt, and delayed results. This is why consistency is rare. It demands emotional neutrality. Most people stop when they feel tired, discouraged, or uninspired. The self-made framework removes emotion from the equation. Action becomes procedural, non-negotiable, detached from how the day feels. This is not discipline in the dramatic sense. It is discipline through design. Consistent people reduce friction. They simplify decisions. They lower the bar for daily execution while raising the standard for longevity. Instead of asking, "How much can I do today?" they ask, "What can I do every day, even on my worst days?" This question changes everything. Because consistency thrives on reliability, not heroics. A small action done daily outperforms massive effort done occasionally. Not because it feels better, but because it compounds. Compounding is ruthless. It rewards what persists. It ignores what starts strong and fades. This is why consistency quietly outperforms talent. Talent often encourages bursts of effort. Early wins create overconfidence. When results slow, frustration sets in. Consistent thinkers expect slow progress. They are not surprised by it. They build for it. Consistency also sharpens judgment. Repetition reveals what works and what doesn't. It creates feedback loops. Patterns become visible. Adjustments become intelligent. Intensity skips this phase entirely. It overwhelms the system with effort before learning can occur. The self-made individual values momentum over motivation. Momentum is mechanical. Once established, it carries effort forward even when enthusiasm disappears. Motivation, by contrast, is unreliable. It arrives late and leaves early. This is why consistent people appear calm. They are not constantly restarting. They are not constantly recovering. Their energy is preserved because their system is stable. Consistency also builds identity. Every repeated action reinforces self-trust. You begin to see yourself as someone who follows through. This identity becomes self-sustaining. You no longer rely on willpower, you rely on pattern. Inconsistent effort erodes this trust. Each broken promise weakens confidence. Over time, people stop believing in their own plans. They chase novelty instead of depth. The self-made framework protects against this by narrowing focus. Fewer goals. Clear priorities. Defined daily actions. Consistency does not require ambition across many fronts. It requires loyalty to the few things that matter most. Another quiet advantage of consistency is resilience. When setbacks occur, and they always do, the consistent individual does not panic. The system remains intact. One bad day does not derail months of progress. Recovery is quick because the baseline is stable. Intensity, on the other hand, collapses under disruption. Miss a few days and everything feels lost. Starting again feels overwhelming. This creates avoidance, which creates guilt, which creates more delay. Consistency removes drama from progress. It also attracts opportunity. People trust those who are reliable. Capital flows toward predictability. Partnerships form around dependability. Over time, consistency becomes a signal of competence. This is why self-made fortunes often grow quietly for years before becoming visible. The work was never explosive, it was continuous. And here is the deeper truth most people never confront. Consistency forces you to face yourself. There is nowhere to hide when effort is steady. Weak systems are exposed. Poor assumptions surface. Discipline replaces excuses. This is uncomfortable. But discomfort is the price of leverage. The self-made thinker embraces this. They prefer slow clarity over fast illusion. They choose progress they can repeat over results they cannot sustain. And once consistency is established, something powerful happens. Effort begins to feel lighter. Not because the work disappears, but because resistance fades. Habits take over. Momentum carries action forward. At this point, wealth creation stops feeling like a grind and starts feeling like a process. But consistency alone is not enough. Because consistency applied to the wrong actions compounds failure just as efficiently as success. Which raises the next critical question in the mental framework behind every self-made fortune. How do you know which actions deserve consistency, and which ones are silently wasting your time, energy, and potential? That distinction changes everything. Chapter 6. Why Leverage Matters More Than Effort Ever Will. What if the real reason so many hardworking people remain financially stuck is not a lack of discipline or ambition, but a misunderstanding of how results are actually created? What if effort, when applied without leverage, quietly becomes a trap that consumes time without multiplying outcomes. Every self-made fortune is built on leverage, not motivation, not hustle. Leverage. Most people are taught that success comes from working harder. Put in more hours, push more, sacrifice more. And while effort is necessary in the early stages, effort alone does not scale. It caps out. There are only so many hours in a day, so much energy in a body, so much attention in a mind. The self-made framework recognizes this limit early. Instead of asking, "How can I work harder?" the self-made thinker asks, "How can one action produce multiple results?" This question shifts the entire approach to work, money, and decision-making. Leverage is the ability to produce disproportionate results from the same, or even less, effort. This is why two people can work equally hard for years and end up in completely different places. One relies solely on personal effort. The other builds systems, skills, assets, or decisions that continue working even when they are not. Effort is linear. Leverage is exponential. Most people confuse busyness with progress. They fill their days with tasks that must be repeated endlessly. When they stop, the results stop. This creates exhaustion and anxiety. Deep down, they know that if they pause, everything collapses. The self-made individual avoids this trap by designing leverage into their actions from the beginning. Leverage appears in many forms. Knowledge is leverage. Learn once, apply forever. Systems are leverage. Build once, benefit repeatedly. Capital is leverage. Money that works harder than time. Relationships are leverage. Collaboration that multiplies reach and capability. Even decision-making frameworks are leverage. Fewer mistakes, faster clarity. The key is that leverage separates input from output. This is uncomfortable for many people because leverage requires thinking before acting. It delays visible effort. It often looks like inaction from the outside. While others are busy doing, the self-made thinker is designing. Design always precedes scale. This is why impatience sabotages leverage. When urgency dominates, people default to brute force. They choose the action that produces immediate feedback instead of the one that produces lasting impact. Over time, this locks them into effort-dependent lives. The self-made framework resists this urge. It asks, will this action still matter next month? Next year? 5 years from now? If the answer is no, the action is questioned, no matter how productive it feels. Leverage also explains why consistency must be selective. Consistency applied to low-leverage actions compounds exhaustion. Consistency applied to high-leverage actions compounds freedom. This is a crucial distinction. Many people are consistent, but consistently busy with the wrong things. They execute perfectly on tasks that do not scale. The self-made thinker constantly audits effort, asking where leverage can be increased. Leverage also changes how risk is perceived. Low-leverage paths require constant effort just to stay in place. High-leverage paths may involve uncertainty up front, but they reduce long-term fragility. The self-made individual chooses temporary uncertainty over permanent dependence. This is why they are willing to learn deeply, build patiently, and delay rewards. They understand that once leverage is established, progress accelerates naturally. Another uncomfortable truth: leverage exposes inefficiency. When effort is reduced and results increase, excuses disappear. This forces clarity. It becomes obvious which skills matter, which actions produce returns, and which beliefs were limiting. This clarity can feel threatening. Many people unconsciously avoid leverage because it removes the comfort of being busy. Busyness feels safe. Leverage demands accountability. But accountability is power. Leverage also reshapes identity. When you stop measuring worth by hours worked and start measuring by value created, self-respect increases. You become less reactive, less rushed, more strategic. Time stops feeling scarce because effort is no longer the only currency. This is why self-made individuals often appear calm. Their progress does not depend on constant exertion. Their systems carry weight. However, leverage introduces a new challenge, one that many never anticipate. When actions scale, mistakes scale too. Poor thinking, flawed assumptions, and emotional decisions become amplified. This is why leverage without clarity is dangerous. And this leads directly to the next pillar of the mental framework behind every self-made fortune: how self-made thinkers develop clear judgment, the ability to make high-quality decisions repeatedly, even under pressure, uncertainty, and incomplete information. Because leverage magnifies everything. And without sound judgment, it magnifies the wrong things just as efficiently. Chapter 7: How Clear Judgment Separates Builders from Burnouts. What if the true bottleneck to wealth is not opportunity, capital, or even leverage, but judgment? What if most people fail not because they lack effort, but because they repeatedly make small, poor decisions that quietly compound against them over time? Every self-made fortune rests on the quality of decisions made when information is incomplete, pressure is high, and outcomes are uncertain. This is judgment. And unlike intelligence, judgment is not about knowing more, it is about thinking better. Most people assume bad outcomes come from bad luck. The self-made framework understands that bad outcomes usually come from distorted judgment, emotional decisions, short-term thinking, overconfidence, fear-based avoidance. These distortions repeat daily, quietly shaping trajectory. Judgment is the filter through which leverage operates. With good judgment, leverage multiplies progress. With poor judgment, leverage multiplies mistakes. This is why some people rise rapidly and then collapse, while others grow steadily and endure. The average person makes decisions reactively. They respond to urgency, emotion, or social pressure. They confuse movement with progress. When stressed, they narrow their thinking. When excited, they overextend. When uncertain, they delay. The self-made thinker does the opposite. They slow down under pressure. They widen perspective when stakes increase. They create distance between emotion and action. This space is where judgment lives. One of the most important habits in developing judgment is separating signal from noise. Modern life is saturated with opinions, trends, advice, and urgency. Most of it is irrelevant. The self-made framework aggressively filters input. Not every problem deserves attention. Not every opportunity deserves pursuit. Clarity comes not from adding more information but from removing distraction. Self-made individuals ask better questions. Instead of asking, "Is this popular?" they ask, "Is this durable?" Instead of, "Can this work?" they ask, "Under what conditions does this fail?" Instead of, "How fast can this grow?" they ask, "What breaks if it scales?" These questions expose weak assumptions early before they become expensive. Judgment also improves when ego is reduced. Ego distorts perception. It seeks validation, avoids embarrassment, and resists correction. The self-made framework treats ego as a liability. Being wrong is not a threat, it is a correction. This is why self-made individuals change their minds faster than others. They are not loyal to opinions. They are loyal to outcomes. Another key element of judgment is understanding second-order effects. Most people see only immediate consequences. The self-made thinker looks beyond the first outcome. They ask what this decision enables, what it restricts, and what it teaches. A choice that feels good now but creates dependency later is avoided. A choice that feels uncomfortable now but builds independence later is favored. This long-range thinking protects against traps disguised as opportunities. Judgment is also shaped by environment. People surrounded by reactive thinkers become reactive themselves. People immersed in short-term incentives adopt short-term behavior. The self-made individual curates inputs carefully, people, information, routines, because judgment is fragile under constant noise. They also build decision rules. Simple principles that guide action under pressure. These rules reduce emotional interference. When the moment arrives, the decision is already made. This is why self-made thinkers appear decisive. Not because they rush, but because they have predecided how they will act in common scenarios. Judgment improves through reflection. After decisions are made, outcomes are reviewed. Not emotionally but analytically. What assumption was correct? What variable was missed? What would be done differently next time? This feedback loop sharpens judgment over years, turning experience into wisdom instead of repetition. Poor judgment repeats mistakes. Good judgment extracts lessons. Another overlooked aspect is knowing when not to decide. Not every decision requires action. Some problems resolve themselves. Some opportunities improve with time. The self-made framework respects patience as a judgment tool. They are comfortable waiting when waiting improves clarity. But they are equally comfortable acting when delay creates risk. This balance, knowing when to wait and when to move, is rare. It is built through exposure, reflection, and disciplined thinking. Over time, judgment becomes intuitive, not because it is emotional, but because patterns have been internalized. This is why judgment feels invisible. You only notice it when it's missing. Fortunes are rarely destroyed by one catastrophic decision. They are eroded by thousands of small ones made without clarity. Impulse spending, poor partnerships, misjudged timing, emotional reactions. Each seems insignificant in isolation. Together they shape destiny. The self-made framework guards against this erosion relentlessly. They understand that every decision is a vote, not just for an outcome but for a future self. A vote for discipline or indulgence, for leverage or dependency, for clarity or chaos. And once judgment becomes refined, another shift occurs. Decisions stop being exhausting. Confidence increases, not the loud kind, but the quiet confidence that comes from alignment between thinking and reality. This is when momentum accelerates. But refined judgment introduces a new challenge. Responsibility expands. Decisions carry more weight. Outcomes affect more people. Stakes rise. Which brings us to the next pillar of the mental framework behind every self-made fortune. How self-made individuals scale responsibility without collapsing under pressure, and why most people retreat precisely when their potential impact begins to grow. Chapter 8. Why the ability to carry pressure determines how far you go. What if success doesn't break most people, but pressure does? What if the real reason many never reach their potential is not a lack of skill, judgment, or opportunity, but an inability to carry increasing responsibility without psychologically collapsing? Every self-made fortune eventually encounters pressure. Pressure from larger decisions. Pressure from visibility. Pressure from expectations, both internal and external. And at this stage, many capable people unconsciously sabotage themselves, not because they are weak, but because they never trained for weight they didn't yet carry. Pressure is the price of scale. The self-made framework understands this early. It does not view pressure as a sign that something is wrong. It views pressure as confirmation that something is expanding. Growth, by its nature, creates tension. More leverage means more consequence. More responsibility means more exposure. More influence means more scrutiny. Most people interpret this tension as danger. When pressure rises, the average person seeks relief. They shrink goals. They avoid decisions. They retreat into comfort. They distract themselves. This provides temporary emotional safety but permanently caps growth. The self-made thinker makes a different interpretation. They understand that pressure is not a signal to retreat. It is a signal to upgrade capacity. Capacity is the ability to hold complexity, responsibility, and uncertainty without becoming reactive. It is mental, emotional, and structural. And like any capacity, it can be trained. Pressure does not destroy people. Lack of capacity does. This is why sudden success often implodes. The external gains outpace the internal framework. Without preparation, pressure overwhelms judgment, distorts priorities, and amplifies emotional decision-making. What looks like failure is often overload. The self-made framework anticipates this. It grows capacity intentionally. One way this is done is through controlled exposure. Taking on slightly more responsibility than feels comfortable. Making decisions with real consequences. Allowing small amounts of pressure to be experienced, processed, and normalized. Over time, what once felt heavy becomes manageable. This is the same principle that builds physical strength. You don't lift the maximum on day one. You progressively increase the load. The mind works the same way. Pressure also reveals weak systems. When everything is easy, inefficiency hides. Under pressure, flaws surface. Poor boundaries. Unclear priorities. Fragile routines. The self-made thinker welcomes this exposure. It shows where structure must be reinforced. Most people avoid pressure because it exposes weaknesses. The self-made individual sees pressure as a diagnostic tool. Another critical distinction is emotional regulation. Under pressure, emotions intensify. Fear, impatience, irritation, self-doubt. The average person reacts from these states. The self-made framework trains response instead of reaction. This does not mean suppressing emotion. It means not allowing emotion to dictate action. Space is created between stimulus and decision. Breath slows. Perspective widens. Principles are consulted. This space protects judgment under stress. Pressure also tests identity. When stakes increase, imposter thoughts often surface. Who am I to handle this? What if I fail publicly? What if this costs me everything? These thoughts are not signs of unworthiness. They are signs that identity has not yet caught up to responsibility. The self-made thinker does not run from this discomfort. They update identity through action. They let experience rewrite self-concept. Confidence follows exposure, not affirmation. Another reason pressure overwhelms people is lack of structure. When responsibility increases but systems remain informal, everything feels fragile. Decisions pile up. Attention fragments. Fatigue sets in. The self-made framework responds by tightening structure. Clear priorities. Defined decision criteria. Delegation. Time protection. Pressure is absorbed by systems instead of the nervous system. This is why self-made individuals often appear calm in situations that would overwhelm others. It's not because they feel less pressure. It's because they distribute it more intelligently. Pressure also clarifies values. Under stress, what matters becomes obvious. The self-made thinker uses this clarity to refine direction. They cut distractions. They say no more often. They focus on what truly compounds. Those who avoid pressure never receive this clarity. There is also a hidden benefit to carrying pressure: credibility. People trust those who remain steady when things are difficult. Capital, partnerships, and leadership opportunities gravitate toward individuals who can hold weight without cracking. Pressure becomes a signal of reliability. But this reliability is built slowly. Through repeated moments of choosing responsibility over relief. Through staying present when retreat feels tempting. Through maintaining standards when excuses would be accepted. This is the quiet training ground of fortune. And here is the final truth of this chapter. Pressure does not arrive after success. It arrives on the path to it. If you are not feeling pressure, you are likely not stretching beyond your current capacity. The self-made framework does not seek pressure for its own sake. But it does not fear it. It respects it. It prepares for it. And it grows into it deliberately. Once pressure can be carried without distortion, another transformation becomes possible. Focus sharpens. Effort concentrates. Noise fades. And that leads directly to the next pillar of the mental framework behind every self-made fortune. How self-made individuals master focus in a distracted world, and why the ability to direct attention may be the most valuable skill of all in the modern age. Chapter 9. Why control of attention determines everything you build. What if the greatest threat to wealth is not risk, failure, or competition, but distraction? What if the ability to control your attention quietly determines what you build, what you abandon, and ultimately who you become? Every self-made fortune is built on focused attention applied over time. Not talent scattered across many directions. Not effort diluted by constant interruption. But sustained focus on the few things that truly compound. Attention is the gateway to action. What you consistently focus on shapes what you think about, what you work on, and what you improve. Over time, attention becomes destiny. Most people live in a reactive state. Their attention is pulled, hijacked, fragmented. Notifications, opinions, trends, urgent but low-value demands. They mistake responsiveness for productivity and busyness for progress. At the end of the day, they are tired, but nothing meaningful has moved forward. The self-made framework treats attention as a finite, valuable asset. They understand that energy follows focus. Where attention goes, effort follows. And where effort follows repeatedly, results eventually appear. This makes attention one of the highest leverage decisions a person can control. Self-made individuals are ruthless about where their attention goes. Not out of rigidity, but out of respect for compounding. They know that a small distraction repeated daily can outweigh hours of disciplined work. They also know that deep focus applied consistently can outperform superior resources applied sporadically. Focus is not about doing more. It is about excluding more. This is uncomfortable for many people because exclusion feels like loss. Saying no to opportunities, conversations, information, and stimulation creates fear of missing out. But the self-made thinker understands the deeper truth. Missing out is the price of building something meaningful. You cannot build deeply while living shallowly. Focus also requires solitude. Not isolation, but uninterrupted time to think, plan, and execute without external input. Most people avoid solitude because it removes distraction and exposes internal noise. The self-made framework embraces it because clarity lives there. This is where strategy forms, where assumptions are questioned, where leverage is identified. Without this space, life becomes a series of reactions. Another distinction lies in how problems are approached. Distracted minds jump between issues, half-solving many and finishing none. Focused minds stay with a problem long enough to understand it fully. This depth produces insight. Insight produces advantage. This is why self-made individuals often seem to see solutions others miss. They are not smarter, they stay longer. Focus also protects judgment. Constant input distorts thinking. Opinions become louder than principles. Trends overpower fundamentals. The self-made thinker limits exposure intentionally. They choose fewer sources, higher quality input, and more time for synthesis. Information is consumed selectively, not compulsively. Attention discipline also shapes identity. When you repeatedly focus on building, learning, and improving, you begin to see yourself as a creator rather than a consumer. This identity reinforces behavior. Consumption loses its appeal. Progress becomes rewarding. Most people try to change habits without changing attention. It rarely works. Attention precedes habit. What you watch, read, and think about repeatedly becomes what you do. The self-made framework starts here. Another overlooked aspect is emotional focus. Many people spend enormous attention replaying past mistakes or worrying about future outcomes. This drains capacity without producing value. The self-made thinker acknowledges emotion but does not dwell there. Attention is redirected toward action, learning, or planning. Not because emotions are ignored, but because attention must serve progress. Focus also enables mastery. Skills require repetition, depth, and sustained engagement. Distracted practice produces shallow competence. Focused practice produces excellence. Excellence attracts leverage. This is why self-made individuals often dominate narrow domains before expanding. They compress attention into a focused area until competence becomes undeniable. Only then do they scale. Scaling without focus creates fragility. Focus without scaling creates limitation. The framework balances both, but focus always comes first. There is also a temporal aspect to attention. The self-made thinker protects prime cognitive hours. They schedule deep work when energy is highest. Shallow tasks are pushed to the margins. This is not about rigid routines, it is about respecting how the mind works. Most people reverse this. They give their best hours to distraction and their leftovers to creation. Over time, this inversion becomes destiny. Attention control also reduces stress. When focus is clear, decisions simplify. Priorities sharpen. Noise fades. Anxiety often comes not from too much to do, but from unclear focus on what matters most. The self-made framework continually asks, what deserves my attention right now? And just as importantly, what does not? This constant filtering is exhausting at first, but over time it becomes automatic. Focus turns into a habit, not a struggle. And once attention is mastered, another shift occurs. Effort becomes more effective. Leverage compounds faster. Judgment sharpens. Pressure feels manageable. At this stage, the external world may still be chaotic, but the internal world is ordered. However, there is one final mental shift that determines whether all of this results in lasting fortune or temporary success. A shift so subtle that most people never notice when they violate it. Because even with focus, leverage, judgment, and consistency, fortunes can still stall or collapse if one principle is ignored. And that principle, the final pillar of the mental framework behind every self-made fortune, is revealed in the next chapter, where everything you've learned is either locked into permanence or quietly undone. Chapter 10: Why Identity Locks Wealth In or Pushes It Away. What if the final reason fortunes either last or disappear has nothing to do with money at all? What if, after discipline, leverage, focus, judgment, and pressure tolerance are mastered, everything still hinges on something far quieter: identity? Every self-made fortune eventually collides with identity. Not public identity. Internal identity. The story you unconsciously tell yourself about who you are, what you deserve, and how you are allowed to live. This story is powerful because behavior always works to stay consistent with identity. People do not rise to the level of their goals. They fall, or stabilize, at the level of their self-concept. Most people think identity is fixed, something inherited, something discovered. The self-made framework understands something radically different. Identity is constructed through repeated decisions. And once constructed, it becomes self-reinforcing. This is why sudden success often destabilizes people. Their external reality changes faster than their internal identity. Money arrives, opportunity expands, responsibility increases. But the self-image remains anchored to scarcity, struggle, or limitation. The result is internal friction. That friction expresses itself subtly. Overspending, self-sabotage, poor boundaries, risky decisions, comfort-seeking. These behaviors are not random. They are attempts to restore internal consistency. The mind always tries to return to what feels familiar. The self-made thinker anticipates this collision. They understand that building wealth requires updating identity deliberately. Not through affirmation, but through alignment. They begin to see themselves as a builder, not a consumer. A steward, not a spender. A long-term thinker, not a short-term reactor. This identity is reinforced daily through small, disciplined choices. Identity is not changed by words. It is changed by evidence. Every time you act in alignment with a higher standard, the mind adjusts its self-image. Over time, this new identity becomes normal, expected, comfortable. And once that happens, maintaining success requires less effort. This is why true self-made wealth feels stable. It is not constantly defended. It is lived from. Identity also governs what feels allowed. Many people unconsciously cap their success because greater responsibility, visibility, or wealth feels foreign or unsafe. They associate success with isolation, pressure, or loss of freedom. Their behavior then works to avoid crossing that threshold. The self-made framework examines these beliefs ruthlessly. They ask, what stories am I telling myself about success? About money? About responsibility? About who I am allowed to become? These stories are rarely logical. They are emotional, inherited, and outdated. But until they are challenged, they control behavior. Identity also determines standards. What you tolerate reveals who you believe you are. Poor health, disorganization, reactive schedules, leaky boundaries. These conditions persist not because people like them, but because they feel consistent with self-image. The self-made thinker raises standards quietly and consistently, not to impress others but to reinforce identity. Clean systems, clear calendars, thoughtful decisions. Each action sends a signal inward: this is who I am now. Once identity shifts, behavior follows automatically. This is also why discipline becomes easier at higher levels. Not because life gets easier, but because actions align with self-concept. There is less internal negotiation, less resistance, less self-betrayal. Identity removes friction. Another overlooked aspect is identity in time. The self-made individual does not see themselves as someone trying to build wealth. They see themselves as someone who builds systems over decades. This identity reframes impatience. Waiting no longer feels like delay, it feels like process. Identity also protects against ego inflation. When success arrives, the self-made thinker does not see it as proof of superiority. They see it as confirmation of alignment. This keeps learning alive. Adaptation continues. Arrogance is avoided. This humility is not weakness. It is stability. Identity also governs relationships. As internal standards rise, alignment becomes necessary. Some connections fall away. Others deepen. This is not rejection. It is calibration. The self-made framework accepts this without drama. Trying to maintain an old identity while living a new life creates tension. Letting identity evolve resolves it. Perhaps the most important function of identity is resilience. When setbacks occur, and they will, the self-made individual does not collapse into self-doubt. Their identity is not tied to outcomes but to process. A failed venture does not mean, I am a failure. It means, this is part of building. This distinction preserves momentum. Over time, identity becomes the anchor that holds everything in place. Leverage scales. Focus deepens. Pressure increases. But identity stabilizes the system. Without this anchor, success remains fragile. With it, success becomes durable. This is the final layer of the mental framework behind every self-made fortune. Not strategy. Not tactics. But alignment between who you are becoming and what you are building. Because wealth is not just something you achieve. It is something you must be able to live with. And once identity, behavior, and vision are aligned, fortune stops feeling like something you chase, and starts feeling like something that grows naturally around you. From the inside out. Chapter 11. Why long-term thinking quietly outperforms everything else. What if the most powerful advantage in wealth creation is not speed, intelligence, or even discipline, but the ability to think long-term when everyone else is trapped in the short term? What if fortunes are not built by those who move fastest, but by those who see farthest? Every self-made fortune is the result of long-term thinking applied consistently under short-term pressure. This is one of the least glamorous and most decisive elements of the mental framework. It rarely receives praise because it produces little excitement in the beginning. But over time, it quietly dominates every other approach. Most people are governed by the near future. They make decisions based on what feels good now, what reduces discomfort quickly, or what produces immediate validation. This is not a character flaw, it is a natural human tendency. The problem is that short-term thinking compounds invisibly just like long-term thinking does. Only the outcomes differ. Short-term thinking optimizes for relief. Long-term thinking optimizes for position. The self-made framework prioritizes position relentlessly. Position in skills. Position in networks. Position in ownership. Position in reputation. These positions may not feel rewarding immediately, but they create leverage that expands over time. This is why self-made individuals often accept temporary discomfort without complaint. They are not sacrificing blindly. They are trading the present for a stronger future stance. They understand that being well-positioned is more valuable than being comfortable. Long-term thinking also changes how decisions are evaluated. Instead of asking, "Will this work?" the self-made thinker asks, "If this works, what does it lead to?" Instead of asking, "Can I afford this now?" they ask, "What does this habit create over 10 years?" These questions expose hidden costs and hidden benefits that short-term thinkers never see. Long-term thinking also protects against trends. Trends reward early excitement and punish late participants. Most people arrive late because they wait for certainty. The self-made framework looks past trends toward fundamentals. Skills that endure. Systems that persist. Needs that never disappear. This is why self-made fortunes often seem disconnected from hype. They are built quietly, patiently, and methodically, while attention chases novelty elsewhere. Another advantage of long-term thinking is emotional stability. When your horizon is long, daily fluctuations lose power. Bad days matter less. Temporary setbacks do not feel catastrophic. Progress is measured in years, not hours. This stabilizes decision-making under stress. Short-term thinkers panic when results dip. Long-term thinkers adjust calmly. They understand variance. They expect noise. They know that consistency over time matters more than any single outcome. Long-term thinking also reshapes how success is defined. Instead of chasing wins, the self-made individual builds processes. Wins are welcomed, but they are not chased. Process is trusted. This prevents recklessness and protects momentum. This is especially critical with money. Short-term money feels exciting. Long-term money feels boring. And boring is often safer, stronger, and more scalable. Compounding favors patience, not excitement. The self-made framework understands that most financial mistakes are not made because people are foolish, but because they are impatient. They overextend. They rush scale. They skip foundations. Long-term thinking removes this pressure. It also clarifies what is worth doing. When you think in decades, many options disqualify themselves. Low-leverage activities, shallow skills, fragile income streams, time-consuming distractions. These fall away naturally. What remains are fewer, higher-quality commitments. Long-term thinking also changes how relationships are formed. Instead of transactional interactions, the self-made thinker builds trust over time. Reputation becomes an asset. Reliability becomes currency. These qualities compound just like capital. This is why opportunities often come out of nowhere to self-made individuals. They don't. They arrive from seeds planted years earlier. Another overlooked benefit of long-term thinking is integrity. When your horizon is long, shortcuts lose appeal. Cutting corners may help today but harm tomorrow. The self-made framework protects future optionality fiercely. They avoid actions that limit future choices, even if those actions promise immediate gain. This creates freedom. Long-term thinkers also accept that progress is uneven. Some years produce little visible growth. Others produce exponential results. The self-made individual does not lose faith during quiet periods. They understand that compounding is nonlinear. Most people quit during the flat phase. This is why long-term thinking is rare. It requires faith without fantasy, patience without passivity, discipline without applause. It asks you to commit when rewards are distant and invisible. But for those who do, the payoff is disproportionate. Long-term thinking also refines identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone chasing outcomes and start seeing yourself as someone building a life architecture. Each decision is evaluated by how it fits into that structure. Life becomes coherent instead of chaotic. And once long-term thinking is internalized, something subtle but powerful happens. Urgency loses control. Anxiety decreases. Confidence becomes quieter and more grounded. You stop reacting to the world and start shaping it. At this stage, effort feels purposeful instead of frantic. Progress feels inevitable instead of fragile. But long-term thinking introduces one final challenge. One that determines whether wealth becomes a source of freedom or a source of complexity and stress. Because as systems grow, responsibilities multiply. And without simplicity, even the strongest frameworks can collapse under their own weight. Which leads to the next chapter in the mental framework behind every self-made fortune. Why simplicity, not complexity, is the ultimate form of intelligence, and how those who master it gain an advantage that never disappears. Chapter 12. Why simplicity is the highest form of power. What if the greatest sign of intelligence is not complexity but simplicity? What if the reason many fortunes stall or collapse is not because they lacked opportunity, but because they became too complicated to sustain? Every self-made fortune that lasts is built on simplicity. Not simplistic thinking, but clear, intentional reduction. The removal of unnecessary complexity. The discipline to focus on what matters most and eliminate what does not. Most people associate growth with addition. More strategies, more tools, more commitments, more streams, more options. At first, this feels productive. But over time, complexity increases friction. Decisions slow. Errors multiply. Focus fragments. The self-made framework recognizes this pattern early. Instead of constantly adding, self-made thinkers subtract. They simplify systems, schedules, and goals. They ask, what is essential? What actually drives results? What creates leverage? Everything else is questioned. Simplicity is not about doing less for comfort. It is about doing less for clarity. Clarity amplifies execution. When systems are simple, they are easier to maintain. When decisions are fewer, judgment improves. When focus is narrow, effort compounds. This is why simplicity creates power. Complex systems are fragile. They break under stress. They require constant attention. They depend on perfect execution. Simple systems are resilient. They bend without breaking. They recover quickly. They scale cleanly. The self-made framework favors robustness over sophistication. Simplicity also protects time and energy. Every additional commitment demands attention. Every new project creates overhead. Over time, this overhead consumes capacity that could have been used for compounding. Self-made individuals guard against this by saying no, often. They resist the temptation to chase everything that works. They understand that doing fewer things exceptionally well outperforms doing many things adequately. Another critical aspect of simplicity is decision reduction. The more decisions you make daily, the more fatigue accumulates. Decision fatigue leads to shortcuts, poor judgment, and emotional choices. The self-made framework minimizes unnecessary decisions. Routines are standardized. Priorities are clear. Defaults are established. This preserves cognitive energy for high-impact thinking. Simplicity also enhances focus. When there are fewer moving parts, attention can go deeper. Problems can be understood fully. Solutions can be implemented thoroughly. This depth creates mastery. Most people skim life. Self-made thinkers go deep. Simplicity also exposes truth. Complex explanations can hide flawed logic. Simple models reveal assumptions. When something cannot be explained clearly, it is often not understood well. This is why self-made individuals value simple principles over complicated theories. Principles endure. Techniques change. Another overlooked benefit of simplicity is speed. While complexity slows execution, simplicity accelerates it. Decisions are made faster. Actions are taken with confidence. Momentum builds. This speed is not rushed, it is clean. Simplicity also makes scaling possible. Systems that are simple can be replicated, delegated, automated. Complex systems depend too heavily on the creator and collapse when stretched. This is why many people become trapped in their own success. Their systems cannot grow without them. The self-made framework avoids this by designing for simplicity from the beginning. Simplicity also protects integrity. When systems are clean, shortcuts are unnecessary. Transparency increases. Trust deepens. Reputation strengthens. Wealth flows toward clarity. There is also a psychological benefit. Simplicity reduces anxiety. When life is cluttered, the mind is cluttered. When systems are clean, the mind can rest. This calm improves judgment and resilience. The self-made thinker understands that mental clarity is a competitive advantage. Simplicity is also an act of courage. It requires letting go of options. It demands commitment. It removes the illusion of flexibility that complexity provides. But in exchange, it offers power. Many people avoid simplicity because it forces prioritization, and prioritization exposes what truly matters. The self-made framework embraces this exposure. As wealth grows, simplicity becomes even more important. More money creates more opportunity, but also more distraction. Without intentional simplification, life becomes reactive again. This is why enduring fortunes often look deceptively simple from the outside. Few businesses, clear structures, stable routines, strong principles. But this simplicity is not accidental. It is designed. Simplicity is not the absence of ambition. It is the refinement of it. And once simplicity is established, another transformation occurs. Execution becomes smoother. Focus deepens. Stress decreases. Growth stabilizes. At this stage, the framework is strong. But one final element determines whether it becomes a legacy or fades with time. Because wealth that cannot outlive the individual is not fully complete. Which leads to the next chapter in the mental framework behind every self-made fortune. Why legacy thinking changes how decisions are made, and how those who adopt it operate on a level most never reach. Chapter 13. Why legacy thinking transforms success into permanence. What if the difference between fleeting success and enduring fortune is not more money, skills, or influence, but the ability to think in terms of legacy. What if the most powerful decisions are those made not for immediate reward, but for impact that outlasts a lifetime? Every self-made fortune that persists eventually embraces legacy thinking. This is a mindset shift so profound that it changes how every choice is evaluated, how every relationship is nurtured, and how every system is built. Without it, wealth may exist, but it is fragile, temporary, and dependent on constant intervention. Most people operate in the present or the near future. They optimize for comfort, recognition, and instant gratification. Their goals are transactional: get a raise, sell a product, gain attention. These achievements can be impressive, but they rarely endure. They are leaves on the wind, beautiful but transient. Legacy thinking flips the lens. Decisions are measured not by what they deliver today, but by how they ripple through years, decades, and generations. Actions are evaluated on permanence, scalability, and influence. The horizon stretches far beyond immediate reward, and the framework of patience, consistency, leverage, and simplicity converges to serve long-term impact. Self-made thinkers ask questions others avoid. Will this decision still matter in 20 years? Does this relationship create compounding value over a lifetime? Am I building a system or just chasing temporary applause? Each answer shapes the architecture of lasting success. Legacy thinking also redefines failure. Short-term loss is no longer catastrophic. When the lens is decades, setbacks become lessons, experiments, and opportunities to refine systems. Losses compound wisdom rather than eroding confidence. The self-made individual accepts failure as part of the structure, not as a verdict on worth. Another advantage of legacy thinking is its effect on risk assessment. Impulsive decisions and emotionally charged gambles diminish when the stakes include enduring consequences. The self-made framework evaluates opportunity through the lens of permanence. Ventures are scaled thoughtfully. Partnerships are chosen strategically. Wealth is accumulated intentionally with an eye toward sustainability. Legacy thinking also transforms identity. It shifts self-perception from "I am building for myself" to "I am building for something greater." This mindset fosters discipline, resilience, and perspective. It strengthens character because actions are no longer measured against temporary gain but against enduring standards. The self-made individual becomes someone whose choices reflect values that transcend time. This perspective also influences the design of systems. Structures are built not for speed or novelty alone, but for resilience and adaptability. Processes are documented, teams are trained, and redundancies are designed. Complexity is avoided. Simplicity is prioritized because a system that must endure cannot rely solely on the genius or energy of one person. Legacy thinking enhances leverage as well. Decisions now compound not only in financial terms, but in intellectual, social, and structural capital. Investments, relationships, and knowledge create cascading benefits that accelerate over time. The horizon of influence expands far beyond immediate circles, producing returns that are exponential, invisible at first, and transformative in the long run. It also reorients attention. Every day, the self-made thinker must choose where to focus energy. Legacy thinking provides a compass. Prioritize actions that will echo, ignore distractions that do not endure. This discipline protects time, enhances judgment, and magnifies the effect of every hour invested. Pressure, patience, consistency, leverage, simplicity, and identity, all of the pillars developed so far, find their ultimate expression through legacy thinking. It becomes the lens through which every decision is filtered. Choices that once seemed critical for short-term results are deprioritized if they do not serve permanence. The horizon expands, the mind sharpens, and action becomes intentional at a level most will never reach. Another subtle power of legacy thinking is emotional stability. When the measure of success is enduring impact rather than temporary applause, fear, envy, and impatience lose their power. The self-made thinker does not react to noise. They remain calm, grounded, and committed to principles. Momentum is preserved even when the world is chaotic. Legacy thinking also magnifies judgment. Decisions made with time and consequence in mind are more deliberate, rational, and aligned with core objectives. The lens of permanence filters impulses, clarifies priorities, and strengthens the capacity to navigate uncertainty with precision. And perhaps most importantly, legacy thinking changes the way wealth is shared. Financial and social resources are deployed not just to maintain personal comfort, but to create structures that can endure, inspire, and empower others. This transforms wealth from a personal achievement into a generative force, capable of affecting countless lives beyond the individual's own. But here is the final pivot. Legacy thinking is not inherited. It is cultivated. Every choice, every action, and every system either strengthens it or undermines it. The self-made fortune that lasts is the one where legacy thinking is internalized deeply enough to guide action automatically, even when it goes unseen, unrewarded, or uncomfortable. And once legacy thinking is fully integrated, a rare transformation occurs. Wealth becomes not just accumulation but alignment, not just survival but influence, not just success but permanence. At this point, the self-made individual does not chase opportunity. They create it, protect it, and multiply it, knowing that every action echoes far beyond their immediate horizon. But even with legacy as a lens, one final mental framework remains. One subtle yet crucial element that separates fortunes that last generations from those that fade quietly into memory. Chapter 14. Why strategic patience wins when everyone else races. What if the single most overlooked advantage in building lasting wealth is not talent, luck, or effort, but patience? Not the passive kind, but strategic patience. The ability to wait, act, and execute at precisely the right moment while others rush, panic, or overcommit. Every self-made fortune eventually faces moments where action is possible, but timing is everything. The impatient fail. The reactive act prematurely. The overconfident miscalculate. The self-made framework thrives here because it cultivates patience with intention and strategy, transforming waiting into leverage. Most people confuse patience with inaction. They believe that if they are not visibly hustling, they are behind. This is a misperception. True strategic patience is active. It is deliberate observation, preparation, and alignment. It is a mental and operational stance that maximizes the probability of success while minimizing wasted energy and resources. The self-made thinker asks, when is action premature? When is waiting productive? What information or systems must be in place before this decision can be executed effectively? These questions create a pause, a strategic window where preparation compounds unseen, invisible to others who are blinded by urgency. Patience is not passive. It is anticipatory. It requires awareness of timing, leverage, and the cascading consequences of action. Every choice to wait is calculated, every delay intentional. By contrast, impulsive action often produces immediate results, but rarely lasting ones. The framework of strategic patience also protects against emotional volatility. Impatience is often rooted in fear of missing out, fear of stagnation, or fear of judgment. The self-made individual recognizes this and disciplines attention, emotion, and identity to resist reactionary impulses. Waiting is not uncomfortable. It is a tool. Another subtle advantage is compounding through observation. When most are rushing, mistakes are frequent, systems are fragile, and opportunities are poorly understood. Strategic patience allows the observer to map patterns, anticipate shifts, and act when the landscape is most favorable. This creates asymmetric advantage. Patience also enhances leverage. Actions executed too early often dissipate impact. Waiting allows conditions, relationships, and systems to align. The same action, deployed strategically, produces multiple-fold returns. Timing transforms effort into exponential impact. Consistency and patience intersect here. The self-made thinker maintains steady action in areas under their control while waiting in areas that require precise alignment. Habits are preserved, momentum maintained, and pressure absorbed. Waiting does not mean stagnation. It means acting where influence is maximal and risk minimal. Strategic patience also protects identity. When impatient, people compromise standards, cut corners, or chase validation. Waiting allows alignment with principles. It preserves long-term focus while resisting temporary impulses. This approach also stabilizes judgment. Decisions are made from clarity rather than urgency. Observation allows pattern recognition, contextual understanding, and risk assessment that impulsive actors cannot achieve. The result is consistent, high-quality decision-making over time. Another effect is resilience. Patience reduces the emotional cost of setbacks. The self-made individual knows that timing is cyclical, conditions fluctuate, and opportunities can recur. Losses are temporary, and delayed gains are rarely regretted because they arrive when readiness meets leverage. Strategic patience also interacts with leverage and simplicity. By waiting, unnecessary complexity is avoided, and systems are refined before scale. Effort is not diluted by premature execution. Focus is preserved for actions that will compound. Social dynamics are also influenced. Those who act impulsively burn bridges, exhaust resources, and make decisions visible before they are sustainable. Strategic patience allows observation of human behavior, cultivation of relationships, and timing of influence for maximum effect. Trust, credibility, and reputation compound quietly during these waiting periods. Even under extreme pressure, the self-made thinker maintains patience. They do not rush to reduce stress. Instead, they strategically assess options, deploy resources wisely, and act when the outcome is optimized. This contrasts with reactive actors who often scramble, overextend, and reduce long-term leverage in pursuit of temporary relief. Finally, strategic patience builds identity alignment. Each choice to wait reinforces self-discipline, confidence, and trust in systems over emotion. The individual internalizes the principle that success is not measured by speed but by timing and impact. Actions are no longer impulsive. They are intentional, deliberate, and multiplied by foresight. But strategic patience has a boundary. Waiting is only effective when paired with clarity, leverage, focus, and persistence. Misapplied patience becomes procrastination, lost opportunity, and stagnation. The self-made framework continuously calibrates patience with readiness, ensuring that delay always precedes action, never replaces it. And once strategic patience is mastered, the final layer of the mental framework emerges: the integration of all principles, identity, leverage, focus, simplicity, judgment, legacy, and patience, into a coherent system capable of producing wealth that endures, multiplies, and transcends generations. This integration is subtle, powerful, and rarely observed, but it is the final mental frontier that separates the self-made from the rest. Chapter 15: How Integration of All Principles Creates Unstoppable Momentum. What if the secret to lasting wealth is not any single principle, habit, or tactic, but the seamless integration of every mental framework that precedes it? What if each pillar, leverage, judgment, pressure tolerance, focus, simplicity, identity, legacy, and strategic patience, must converge into a coherent system to generate unstoppable momentum? Every self-made fortune that endures is not built by isolated actions. It is constructed by alignment. Alignment of thought, action, identity, and systems. Each principle amplifies the others. Each habit compounds over time. Disconnected effort produces results, but integrated effort multiplies them. Most people practice principles in isolation. They may be consistent or focused or disciplined, but rarely all simultaneously. The self-made framework recognizes that excellence is systemic, not episodic. One weak link destabilizes the chain no matter how strong the others are. Integration begins with clarity of vision. Knowing not just what you want but why it matters and how each principle contributes to that outcome. Vision is the scaffold. It gives purpose to leverage, patience to timing, and focus to execution. Without vision, integration is accidental and fragile. Leverage without judgment multiplies mistakes. Focus without simplicity dissipates energy. Patience without identity fosters procrastination. Integration ensures that each principle strengthens the others, creating a self-reinforcing loop of growth. Another critical element is rhythm. The self-made framework aligns daily actions with long-term goals. High-leverage tasks are executed at peak attention hours. Decisions are made with clarity and foresight. Systems are maintained simply. Momentum is preserved without burnout. This rhythm is invisible from the outside but devastatingly effective. Integration also stabilizes judgment under pressure. Each principle acts as a guardrail. Focus prevents distraction. Simplicity prevents overwhelm. Identity provides confidence. Patience ensures timing. Legacy thinking ensures alignment with enduring goals. Together, they allow decisions to be made consistently, even when stakes are high. Relationships and social influence compound faster when integrated. The self-made thinker leverages networks strategically, communicates clearly, and builds trust over time. Each interaction is aligned with identity, principles, and long-term vision. Influence grows organically and sustainably. Energy management is another benefit. Integrated principles ensure that effort is directed toward high-impact activities, attention is preserved for critical thinking, and emotional reserves are protected. Fatigue, anxiety, and reactive behavior are minimized. Integration also amplifies compounding. Small actions, consistently aligned with principles, produce exponential returns. Time becomes an ally, not a constraint. Momentum builds quietly at first, then accelerates, creating the perception of effortless success. Failures are absorbed without derailment. The framework corrects errors systematically. Lessons are incorporated, systems adjusted, and focus maintained. Setbacks are no longer catastrophic. They are feedback loops reinforcing resilience and refinement. Identity plays a central role in integration. Every action aligns with the self-image of someone who builds enduring wealth. Choices that contradict identity are filtered out automatically. Habits reinforce who you are becoming, ensuring that behavior, thought, and outcome are synchronized. Legacy thinking ties the system together. Every decision, investment, and effort is evaluated for enduring impact. The integrated framework ensures that wealth is not just accumulated, but preserved, multiplied, and capable of benefiting others beyond the individual. Strategic patience moderates action. Integration without timing produces friction. Patience ensures that leverage is deployed at optimal moments, focus is preserved for the highest priority tasks, and systems are fully prepared for scaling. Timing becomes as important as execution. The final stage of integration is simplicity. Complexity is filtered out. Systems are elegant, not cumbersome. Decisions are clear. Execution is efficient. This allows scaling without chaos, compounding without collapse, and freedom without distraction. When fully integrated, the framework becomes self-sustaining. Momentum becomes unstoppable. Each principle continuously reinforces the others. Success no longer depends solely on willpower, effort, or luck. It emerges naturally from alignment. The rare individual who achieves this integration does not just create wealth. They create leverage, influence, clarity, and freedom that outlast themselves. Their actions, habits, and systems continue to generate returns long after initial effort. This is the ultimate expression of the self-made framework. Wealth that is durable, abundant, and generative. But integration is not a final destination. It is a living system. Continuous evaluation, refinement, and recalibration are required. The world changes, pressures evolve, and opportunities shift. Those who maintain integrated principles over decades are the ones whose fortune becomes not only unstoppable but enduring, capable of leaving a legacy that transforms families, communities, and generations to come. And now, with integration mastered, every other pillar of the mental framework, the focus, leverage, judgment, patience, identity, simplicity, and legacy, operates in harmony, producing the kind of exponential momentum most people only dream about. This is how fortunes are built, maintained, and multiplied for a lifetime.